Meanwhile, a little pig that was unlike any other little pig that had come before him, that for a little over 2 days had journeyed across field and through forest, stopping infrequently to nibble on stale bread and take short naps, was arriving in the city of Oxford. I'm sure you must be wondering how a bipedal pig had made it so far without drawing significant attention, but the truth is that in those days one would encounter far fewer people outside of the big population centres, and those he did pass would merely shake their heads, thinking they'd imagined seeing a pig walking on its hind legs. After all, who would believe them if they spoke? Our pig wasted no time in making his way to the halls of University College, knowing this to be the oldest of the colleges and, therefore, the most likely to house anyone that might understand why he was not like any other pig. It was there that he met the Honourable H. Raleigh Mortimer, Professor of Biology. The professor was a gangly fellow of about 6'2", a mop of mousy brown hair that he combed to the right, though he was forever brushing it away from his brow. Thin, round-framed spectacles on a kind face with sharp features, the kind of cheekbones one could carve the Christmas goose on. He was, when dressed in one of his many suits that were all slightly too big for him, almost rakish. Anyhow, after the understandable shock of the initial meeting, Mortimer quickly became his friend, tutor, and perhaps most important of all, his guardian. You see, it was imperative that the pig's existence be hidden from the general population, for such an anomaly of nature would be woefully misunderstood, and the pig would undoubtedly come to harm. Whenever the pig was to travel outside of the professor's lodgings, he would have to do so on all fours and avoid making any sounds outside of the obvious, oinks, grunts, snorts, and so forth. The pig found this to be terribly demeaning, but understood the necessity, and, out of respect for the man who had embraced him, obliged the instruction for the better part of 10 years. To all at the university, student and faculty alike, he was simply Mortimer's pig, the majority marvelling at how well behaved and clean the animal appeared. In the evenings, much like the elder and younger Stanley had done, the professor and his pig would read about and discuss all which enthralled them, from science and mathematics, language and history, to what constitutes a good brandy. They were kindred spirits, a shy, reserved man, not socially gifted enough to find a partner, oft considered too clever for his own good, and a creature that too would be misunderstood by others, one whom by genetic circumstance alone would be doomed to live a life of solitude, or at least that was their thinking in those early years of the 20th century. The world was rapidly changing, but mankind was, and I'm afraid to say still is, a long way from understanding and accepting all creatures, great and small. However, it is important to understand that there were, and always will be, some people for whom exploration, be it geographical, epistemological, or otherwise, is their raison d'être. For millennia, it has been that these sorts of people would pass through the halls of higher learning, that these lasting connections would come to be the foundation of so many of humankind's greatest discoveries. It is that word, discovery, that would shape the future of this story's protagonist, taking him from a life of obscurity to one of adventure, of fame and fortune. A life most different indeed. The Discovery Expedition, otherwise known as the British Antarctic Expedition of 1901 to 1904, became our pig's primary fascination in the decade that followed. The great Captain Robert Falcon Scott and the equally distinguished Sir Ernest Henry Shackleton, Pig found himself in awe of the feat achieved by these men and others like them, travelling to the furthest, most inhospitable corners of the world, to further human comprehension of planet Earth. He began writing to his heroes, or rather Professor Mortimer did so on his behalf, given that a pig's trotter is not designed for pen or pencil, nor, indeed, the handle of a door. He expressed his admiration for their commitment to exploration, and how he longed to one day be a part of something so meaningful, but that his unique handicap would likely prevent him from doing so. For years, his letters went ignored, though this is unsurprising considering just how much fan mail these people received. They were, like the stars of stage and screen are today, revered by almost anyone, from their peers to the public to royalty indeed. That was until one day, in the summer of 1911, a letter was delivered to the home of Professor Mortimer, addressed to P. Stanley. It should be of no surprise as to what the P stands for, but it is not the name you will become familiar with.
"A letter has arrived for you, dear boy," the professor beamed, "and you won't believe who it's from."
The pig trotted over and climbed onto his specially designed armchair, one that was of a suitable height for someone of his diminutive stature. Professor Mortimer handed his friend the letter, which Piggy had, with many years of practice, learned to grip betwixt his hooves. The letter read as follows: Dear Mr. P. Stanley, it is with sincere apologies that I must start this communication, as my reply is long overdue, being as you first wrote me in March of 1909. Terribly sorry for the delay, but as I'm sure you now know, I have only recently returned from an excursion to Ulaanbaatar, one that I am pleased to inform you was most enlightening. Now that I have returned, I feel it is only appropriate to plan my next journey, and with that in mind, I have a proposition for you. I seek an observer and companion that speaks the King's. I'm rather tired of spending months without communicating in my mother tongue. You write of a unique handicap, but fear not. My ship is furnished with ramps fit for a bath chair, and as we speak, I will have mule or manservant ready to transport you through less agreeable territory. I understand this is terribly forward of me, given that we've not yet met, but I do so wish for erudite companionship on my travels, and your eloquent letter suggests that you're just the man for the job. Therefore, Stanley, I am formally requesting your presence on my expedition to the Andes. We leave with a crew of 40 plus pack animals in 3 months. I eagerly await your reply. Sincerely, Sir Bartleby Wennington Horsforth, 14th Earl of Membury. Pig slumped back in the chair and sighed.
"Whatever is the matter, old boy?" the professor asked. "I would have thought this letter would bring elation, an opportunity of a lifetime, Stanley."
Pig sighed once more.
"Oh, that's just it. An opportunity of a lifetime, no doubt, but one I simply cannot seize. This, like much of our world, is beyond my grasp. What a pity."
"Nonsense!" the professor exclaimed. "I've had the pleasure, and perhaps more often than not the displeasure, of meeting these sorts of people. The landed gentry, the old aristocracy. Well, they're all rather eccentric, and no strangers to genetic abnormality. The ones you might meet look well turned out, but look closer, and you'll see that most of them are, well, a little funny looking, so to speak. Then there are many you don't see that live in private wings and sanatoriums, hidden from the world for their perceived shame they bring upon their families."
"So, I'm a freak, am I?"
Pig replied tersely.
"Far from it, my boy. If appearance didn't matter, you could hold court in any room in England, of that I do not doubt. Yet, as you well know, many simply wouldn't understand the sight of you. These people, on the other hand, will be far more interested in what you have to say, though we ought to consider some tailoring. They're rather finicky about that sort of thing."
Pig paused for thought, bringing his trotter to his chin and resting it there.
"And what, pray tell, do I do if he responds badly to my particular genetic abnormality? Am I to run away? On all fours, perhaps? This is hopeless. I wish you'd just thrown that letter into the fire, spared me the bother."
The Professor frowned. In one respect, he felt Pig spoke the uncomfortable truth. Introducing him to anyone certainly presented considerable risk. On the other hand, Pig was his one true friend, the closest thing to family he had. To see him denied the life he sought was heartbreaking.
"Hold on," the Professor chimed. "I may have an idea."
He walked to his desk, opened the top drawer, and from it produced a small bronze key. He took said key and left the room, only to return a minute or so later with a rectangular box of wooden construction, secured with padlock. He placed the box on his desk, facing away from Pig. He turned the key, released the catch, and gently lifted the lid. He stared silently at the contents of the box, almost transfixed.
"A bottle you've been saving?"
Pig uttered nervously, sensing the drastic change in his friend's demeanour. The Professor looked up from the box and smiled.
"The good stuff can wait, dear boy. We have more pressing matters to attend to."
He reached down and lifted from the box an old-fashioned revolver of British manufacture, clearly well maintained.
"Steady on, chap!"
Pig gulped.
"What on earth do you plan to do with that thing?"
The Professor paused and examined the gun once more, running a finger along the polished mechanisms before bringing it up to the head height and aiming at nothing in particular, sighting with one eye closed.
"This was my father's, you know. Brought it back with him from Afghanistan and locked it away in this box. Gave it to me upon my completion of school, would you believe? I know he wanted me to follow him into the army, but, well, look at me. I'd make a pretty poor soldier. Wouldn't be much good as an officer either. No, I couldn't be what he wanted. The shame, being the only boy. Academia was a tad soft for his aspirations."
Pig tensed and he sat forward.
"Look, I'd love to chat about times past, but any chance you could put the gun down? You're making me rather nervous, old chap."
The Professor spun around and brought the barrel of the gun in line with Pig.
"Good God! What are you thinking?"
Pig gasped.
"Is this because I finished the Courvoisier?"
The Professor cocked the hammer of the revolver.
"Tell me, old boy, if you had a gun pointed at you, would you concede to any demand?"
"I do have a gun pointed at me!"
Pig exclaimed.
"Now, for God's sake, put it down!"
The Professor lowered the gun and smiled.
"I think you've proven my point. We'll go visit the Earl together. I'll get the conversation started, and when the time is right, you'll have the floor. If he reacts poorly, I'll whip this thing out and ask him exactly what he saw, which will, of course, be nothing."
"And what if he tells? Why should he keep his promise?"
Pig asked.
"I'll disguise myself, of course," the Professor smiled. "And he's not meeting Professor H. Raleigh Mortimer, but a P. Stanley. The post goes to the village office before coming here. He doesn't have my address. If necessary, Mr. P. Stanley would simply cease to exist. Come now, old boy, we have a meeting to organise."